Welcome to the 10-minute webinar on culture change in your organization hosted by Root. It's a pleasure to speak with you today and share some of our best practices and how culture can actually change in almost all organizations. You know, to start, we've heard before, and we've actually said many times, that culture eats strategy for lunch. The only way I might change that is that culture eats strategy for each day part, whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, or the in-between meals. It's absolutely clear that unless we change our culture, we can't execute our new strategies. And so how do we really allow culture, how do we enable culture, and how do we nurture culture to change? Maybe the first place to start, though, is what is culture? There's a fair amount of confusion and rarely a common definition of culture, and there's good reason for that, because we use the word culture in a lot of different ways. One way we use culture is the cultivation of bacteria, tissue, cells, etc., in an artificial medium containing nutrients and conditions for growth. Well, obviously, this is a science context for culture, not the way we're using it, but it's also a very valid definition or explanation of culture. One other way that you could think of culture, it's the betterment or refinement of individuals socializing through education. Again, a valid definition of culture, one that I'm sure you've heard before, but not the one we want to use for how to engage people in organizations so they might execute strategies and achieve results. This third definition is one that's almost comical, and maybe it's one of the reasons culture gets such a bad reputation in some cases. But this definition fascinatingly suggests, for the purpose of the Intercultural Studies Project, culture is defined as the shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, cognitive constructs, and affective understanding that are learned through the process of socialization. Show that to any senior executive and they'll shut down anything you're doing on culture instantly. These shared patterns identify the members of culture groups while also distinguish those of another group. This is not helpful in really trying to understand what culture is. And the reason that's so important is before we can change it, we ought to agree on what it exactly is so people can rally around what's important to improve a culture, to challenge a culture, to change a culture, to better support a strategy, bringing a strategy to life in the marketplace. So culture really is the behavior of people in an organization and the meanings that people attach to their actions. It includes values, it includes vision, it can include norms, it can include working language, it can include symbols, systems, beliefs, and habits. Organizational culture affects the way people and groups interact with each other and with all stakeholders. But probably the best definition that I've heard, and possibly the simplest for culture, is that culture is the way we do things around here. Again, I'll just repeat it. Culture is the way we do things around here. The way we as people, in a coalition, in a company, in a group, in a team, do things in this organization. And this is so important because if strategy is what we intend to do, culture is the way we go about doing the work to bring it to life. And being very clear on what we want to continue to keep and what we might want to change in our culture is extremely important. Now, when you talk about culture change, there are two ways to think about it. One is sort of a top-down approach to culture change. And culture change can start successfully from the top of an organization. But it starts from the top of the organization when leaders want to begin to model and be the example of what they expect in others in the way that they interact with each other going forward. One simple way to think about this that has been very helpful to many organizations is to think about leaders challenging and changing their set of beliefs, their set of behaviors, and their set of operating principles and how they alter a culture to better match and make successful a new strategy. Or high performance. In many cases, it doesn't even need to be a new strategy. It's just that our performance is not achieving what we need it to achieve. So a leadership team that would come together to start this, first and foremost, would begin to define and align on a shared set of beliefs. These beliefs are about the business, about how we operate the business, what are our assumptions about the business, and what we stand for in the business. The reason these beliefs are so important is because each individual in an organization may have different beliefs about the business and where the business needs to go. However, unless they're shared, it's hard for them to be aligned, and if they're not aligned, then they're in conflict often with what kind of culture we need to build and how we begin to behave to achieve that culture. The second area is really around the behaviors. There's a book that needs to be written, and the book's title would be What You're Waiting For Will Never Come. And what that title suggests is so many times strategy execution and the sibling to that, culture change, are intellectual for the senior leaders, but emotional and behavioral for everybody else. That simply will not work. What we need to do is be again the example of what we expect in others behaviorally. So the second thing that is often done after the beliefs is to craft the behaviors that senior leaders will absolutely begin to embody, hold themselves and each other accountable to, because these behaviors best match what we want to achieve in the marketplace in the way we work together. The third area is the rules of the road. And when we talk about the rules of the road, we're talking about really defining some of the ways we operate where that operation isn't clear, and it's really important to distinguish in the emerging culture for the future exactly how will we interact together on these important areas of execution. So again, when culture change can occur effectively from the top down, the leaders become what they expect others to become in the way they establish beliefs, they set behaviors, and they define the rules of the road. When this can be accomplished, and when leaders hold themselves accountable to it, top-down culture change can very effectively work. We also know top-down culture change doesn't always work. And the place and the space where it least works is when it becomes plastic, when it becomes sloganeered, and when it becomes an expectation that leaders have for other people and not for themselves. This often works in some organizations where patient delight or patient satisfaction becomes a new priority. And in the end, staff just try to achieve a metric outcome rather than changing their beliefs, changing their behaviors, and changing their routines and how they work. One other way to look at successful change is from the bottom up. One person can make a difference, and it can start in lower levels of the organization in a very, very effective way. And the way to do this is to begin to think about and give permission to individuals to challenge an existing standard practice or belief that is outside of or in conflict with the new strategy. To provide air cover for that, or to secure air cover to test whether a new way of working together, a new way of doing things around here could be more effective, and then harvesting the lessons learned from that application or that test or that experiment and deciding how to scale those lessons learned, whether they're achieved in success or failure. So what this looks like is an individual may find an area in their organization where the way we do things together is not successful to the culture, and they challenge that in a small way. They get air cover or manager leader support to test it, and then they take the benefits of that and scale it to another example of how to change a culture from the bottom up. So when do we need culture change? Well, we said earlier we need culture change with a new strategy, but we also use it when the performance is not what we want it to be. When there's customer erosion, when there's high turnover, when there's lessening of pride in the work we do, and there is a reduced sense of hope and confidence in the future. So how do you really make it work? How do you make culture change in your organization? Two ways, from the top down or the bottom up. From the top down, lead by changing and challenging your beliefs, your behaviors, and your routines, and exhibiting a very personal aspect of that as a leader before you expect it from anyone else. The other way is from the bottom up, where you give permission in the organization for anyone to challenge the way we do work together today, provide air cover to see if a new and better way can create an outstanding result, and then leverage those lessons when success or fail to other areas of the organization. Again, top-down and bottom-up can work, just as I've just suggested. And then the final way that you can really begin to create momentum, and momentum is the right word in culture change, whether it's top-up or bottom-down, is through storytelling. And what really needs to happen is in that storytelling, people need to see what it looks like to change our culture, because it's never clear, the definitions aren't clear. Secondly, they have to understand and really believe that I could do that too, and the stories of culture change begin to provide that for them. And then the third thing is to take a chance and begin to pick a place where they can play. So once you have a successful change in culture, the story you want to tell is to capture the story, tell the story, and then retell the story so people know what it looks like and begin to be part of the culture change that's so important to the execution of strategy. Thank you, and hopefully you're on your way, whether it's top-down or bottom-up, to a successful culture change to either get higher and better results or to successfully implement your new strategy.